right, let's do it. All right, first up, the Winklevoss twins, yeah, the guys that Facebook left on red, have dumped 188 Bitcoin worth about 21 million bucks into a pro-Trump PAC. It's called the Digital Freedom Fund, and its mission is to support Trump's crypto agenda while helping Republicans retake Congress in the 2026 midterms. Tyler Winklevoss said on X that the donation is about backing Trump's administration on crypto policy, pushing market structure legislation, and fighting for things like a de minimis tax exemption. That's the rule that would make small Bitcoin transactions tax-free, so you can finally buy coffee without Bitcoin, with Bitcoin without the IRS showing up like a repo man. They also noted that their private stance is exactly the same as their public stance, which is a nice way of saying, yes, we really do mean this. The $21 million donation is a not so subtle nod to Bitcoin's 21 million coin supply cap, because when you're billionaires, even your donations have Easter eggs. And this isn't their first Trump world cameo either. In 2024, they donated about $2 million in Bitcoin to Trump's campaign. They also dropped $5 million into the Fair Shake PAC, which spent over $130 million backing pro-crypto candidates and attacking anti-crypto ones. By July of 2025, Fair Shake had already raised $141 million for the upcoming 2026 elections. Their earlier generosity got them front row access, inauguration invites, a seat at the March White House Crypto Summit, and even a personal thank you from Trump when he signed the Genius Act. They also invested in American Bitcoin, the Trump family's mining company, which basically makes them shareholders at the family dinner table. But the bromance hit a speed bump. The twins recently urged Trump to reconsider his nomination of Brian Quintez as CFTC chair. Trump nominated Quintez in February, and the Winklevosses initially supported him until they didn't. Other crypto groups quickly lined up in favor of Quintez, sending a letter backing his confirmation. Meanwhile, the Senate Agriculture Committee confirmed the White House asked them to delay the nomination process altogether. So here's the picture here. The Winklevoss twins are using their Bitcoin to support pro-crypto legislation, backing innovation-focused candidates, engaging directly with policymakers at the highest level, and making sure crypto has a serious seat at the table. And they're doing it with the same conviction they've had since the early days of Bitcoin, when most people still thought that it was a fad. All right, we're bringing Julian back. Julian, $21 million in Bitcoin to Trump's PAC isn't just pocket change. What does this signal about how deep-pocketed Bitcoiners are shaping U.S. politics? What do you think?
Well, I think it signals that there's still a lot of work to be done on the legislative front. As we mentioned, market structure has still yet to pass, and I think while industry is largely optimistic about that, there are a few wrinkles there, and maybe some fault lines within the industry, and potentially some different points of view. So there's ongoing engagement from people like the Winklevoss twins, because there's still a bit of influencing to be had and influencing to be done to get this across the finish line. In particular, I think a couple of things stood out to me from the announcement from the Winklevi, kind of centering around what type of legislation they're trying to advance, right? A couple of things. They made reference to, in talking about the market structure bill, they want to see this is using their terminology, a skinny bill rather than a fat bill. What does that mean? Well, they want a more minimal approach here. They don't want over-regulation. They don't want duplicative costs and burdensome registration fees and all this kind of thing. That's not necessarily the approach from other folks in the industry. Another thing that they did mention was wanting to avoid regulatory capture. This is kind of an interesting thing for them to say, because regulatory capture, what does that mean? It usually means regulation that is burdensome, so burdensome that it kind of is an advantage for the incumbents, for the bigger players, right? Because it's only the bigger players that kind of can afford all these compliance costs and paying for their army of lawyers and this type of thing. So Gemini, which is the exchange of the Winklevoss twins, is one of those players, right? So, but it's interesting to hear them at least broadcast the intention of not necessarily just falling in line of where their direct business interest is. So that's that's worth noting for sure. Another thing I want to point out is their support is seemingly contingent on the protection of blockchain developers. And they made kind of special mention of this too, wanting to protect developers and kind of folks developing protocols. This is something that is in the Clarity Act so far. It's called the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, and it basically provides this safe harbor or kind of carve out, which says, hey, if you are developing wallets and you're a developer, you're not actually controlling digital assets in some shape or form, you're not going to be a money transmitter. We're not going to treat you like an exchange. We're not going to put all these burdensome compliance requirements on you, and you might not, and you'll be protected against getting pulled into, various kind of enforcement actions. So overall, I think a positive take from the Winklevoss twins with respect to a kind of a grassroots support for, the developers in the ecosystem and other things. But it does, as I said, signal maybe a bit of a fault line emerging between some different factions in the industry as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when there's a lot of big money at play, there's going to be people that have their own specific goals. We've seen this through the history of time, so no surprise there. One thing the twins did do was they tied their donation to pro-crypto policy goals like the de minimis exemption. How important do you think that specific tax issue is in actually moving Bitcoin toward everyday use?
Well, it's essential. It's a start, I would say. It's kind of necessary but not sufficient, right? Ultimately, for Bitcoin and digital assets to become what's called a medium of exchange, so as in used for everyday transactions for buying coffee or anything else. Well, that's not going to happen if holders and users are taxed every time they make a transaction, right? So absolute bare minimum standard for getting that to happen at scale is for not taxing, for people to not basically be creating a taxable event every time they buy something. So, a de minimis exemption there have been a couple of different numbers floated around, whether it's $600 or $800 or something like that. That would be great for doing that. But of course, it's just a start. $600 isn't very much. And there are plenty of everyday transactions that end up much larger than that. So I like to call it the thin end of the wedge here. It might, if something like a de minimis exemption is passed, it wouldn't kind of revolutionize the financial system and Bitcoin. It's going to make Bitcoin a medium of exchange overnight, but it starts us on that path in a way that right now we aren't yet there.
Yeah, I got a feeling Jack Dorsey would approve. I mean, we do need to eventually go down that road in order to start seeing Bitcoin used as a medium of exchange. We're not quite there yet, seemingly, but the roads are being paved so that hopefully we will be there sooner than later. As far as their donations, we've seen the Winklevoss donate before. I mean, Fair Shake, Trump's inauguration, even some direct investments. How much influence do you think this kind of money really buys in Washington?
It's really hard to say. I think, 21 million is, well, I'll say this. There was certainly a lot more than 21 million donated through the last election cycle from all different stakeholders in the crypto industry, right? So in a kind of aggregate sense, it's maybe not a huge needle mover, but what really goes on behind the scenes? We don't really know. This is kind of how a feature of how this PAC system works. It's hard to track where the money is going a lot of the time, and to whom, right? And for what purpose. So, the Winklevoss have kind of drafted this letter of intent, but who are there are a lot of follow-on questions. Who are the right stakeholders? Who are the right people that are going to be influential in getting across these things that they're talking about? And how much work remains to be done? Also, there are a lot of things on their list that they mentioned there. Like one of the big ones was they said they want to influence outcomes for the midterm elections. They want to support pro-crypto candidates and presumably help primary processes and midterm processes against anti-crypto candidates as well. Now, $21 million doesn't buy you very much if you want to influence election outcomes. Maybe one or two, congressional seats where they might be kind of swing seats where you can make a big difference. So if you're just talking about influencing elections, I don't think 21 million gets you very far. On the other hand, if you're talking about maybe getting some kind of crucial face time with a couple of influential senators, then maybe those dollars go a little bit further.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And the 21 million is a pretty cheeky number. No surprise there. Those two they're smart guys. So, they know what they're doing. I'm sure they'll figure it out. All right, stay tuned, Julian. We're going to go over this next story real quick and we'll bring you right back because Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis is out here promising that a crypto market structure bill will land on the president's desk before the end of the year. Speaking at the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium, Lummis said Republicans want the bill out of the Senate Banking Committee by the end of September and then kicked over to the Senate Agriculture Committee in October because nothing says digital asset innovation quite like the Agriculture Committee. Both committees are tasked with figuring out how the SEC and CFTC are supposed to handle digital assets, which is Washington speak for 2 regulators enter, 1 regulator leaves. Lummis put a Thanksgiving deadline on it, quote, "We will have market structure to the president's desk before the end of the year. I hope it's before Thanksgiving." Bitcoin policy locked in, there she is, before the turkey's out of the oven. Now, this Senate effort comes after the House passed the Clarity Act in July with a surprisingly robust bipartisan vote. 78 Democrats even joined in on the fun. Lummis said the Senate version, tentatively titled the Responsible Financial Innovation Act, will basically be Clarity with a few tweaks. Or in her words, we want to honor as much of the House's work as we can on Clarity. Clarity will probably end up being what passes, but Clarity as tweaked by the Senate. In other words, copy-paste the House's homework, add a few commas, and call it responsible. She's not the only one making promises. Senate Banking Committee Chair Tim Scott also spoke at the symposium, saying between 12 and 18 Democrats are open to voting for market structure once the bill hits the floor. So now we're doing whip counts out loud at blockchain conferences. Meanwhile, the Clarity Act was one of 3 crypto bills the House passed during its so-called Crypto Week. Alongside Clarity, there of course was the Genius Act, regulating stablecoins, which Trump signed into law the next day, and then the Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act, which was about as popular with Democrats as karaoke night with Elizabeth Warren. Out of the 212 Democrats present, only 2 ended up voting for it. Now, Lummis and Senate Republicans have made clear they'll focus on market structure first, which means any anti-CBDC bill could be punted into 2026. So to recap, Senate Republicans want Bitcoin market structure settled before pumpkin pie. They're building on Clarity with the creativity of a lazy group project, and CBDC opponents will be waiting until 2026 to even get their hearing.